Following brief presentation is based off the book Empowering Struggling Readers, Practices for the Middle Grades by Lee Hall, Leslie Burns, and Elizabeth Carr Edwards. For the next 10 minutes, we will be discussing who struggling readers are, techniques on how to create a positive classroom environment, and how to assess students' funds of knowledge. Struggling readers appear to not care about reading and participating in class, but research shows that they do in fact enjoy reading outside of school and are unhappy with how they are perceived as readers. Marginalized readers are constantly seeking ways to be successful in school, and though they understand they have difficulties with reading, they don't know how to become better readers. They also want to participate in class discussions, but don't feel as though they have anything important or relevant to add to the discussions. Struggling readers typically read 1 to 2 years below grade level, but do not have an identified learning disability. Not all struggling readers have difficulties in the same areas of reading either. Some may have difficulty with reading fluency, while others lack comprehension skills. Because of this, each student needs to be given extra help individually. Since struggling readers want to participate, the goal is not to provide them with instruction and reading assignments that will further isolate them from the classroom, but to find ways to engage them so that they can be an active member of the classroom discussion. Surprisingly enough, many students who are labeled as struggling readers possess a great deal of knowledge about reading, but this is not always recognized in schools. This knowledge is based on reading and comprehending texts, books, as well as standardized tests. These students may enjoy reading manuals, magazines, internet articles, but may not be able to read content area texts, and therefore schools classify them as struggling readers. Teachers need to find a way to make the content area readings relevant to the student's life outside of school. Teachers also need to keep in mind that just because a student is resistant to classroom reading doesn't mean they don't want to learn. Schools have produced two groups of readers, struggling readers and good readers, because schools have created an environment that supports the labeling of students as successful or failing. Students who are labeled as struggling readers think they are treated as though they have nothing valuable to add to the classroom. By creating a positive classroom environment, struggling readers feel as though they are not labeled as marginalized readers, and as a result, they are able to gain full access to the classroom reading practices. Creating a positive classroom environment where no student feels as though they are a poor reader means accepting each student's diverse social and cultural backgrounds and how these might usefully contribute to their self-identification as readers. By the time students reach middle school, they have an opinion of what kind of reader they are based on the positive and negative reading experiences they've had in the past. These experiences have shaped their understanding of what they consider reading to be. If the student identifies themselves as a marginalized reader, then the goal of the teacher is engage them in positive reading experiences to help raise the student's self-esteem. The book Empowering Struggling Readers talks about ways to engage and motivate marginalized readers in the classroom. One way we'll discuss is creating a positive classroom environment. Students who have been positioned as struggling readers walk into middle school already thinking they cannot contribute to the classroom discussions because of their past experiences. Most students were labeled since first grade and have kept these labels ever since. One way to change this persona is by finding ways to make marginalized readers become engaged in the classroom reading practices. To do this, teachers need to make the students feel comfortable enough to openly participate. While finding out what limits a student's involvement in classroom reading practices, teachers can help students become more engaged. Teachers can find what limits a student's involvement by having informal discussions at the beginning of the year to create methods that promote participation, and then continue these discussions throughout the year to find out what is and is not working. Struggling students also benefit from seeing that they are not alone and that many of their classmates also have difficulties with reading. This way, they don't feel singled out and embarrassed that they are the only ones. Once students gain enough confidence to participate, they notice that they have valid points to add to the classroom discussion, Then they gain confidence and begin to become more engaged with the classroom reading practices. When teachers are thinking about how to create a positive classroom environment, selecting the correct text is an essential part. As we mentioned in the beginning, marginalized readers often read 1 to 2 grade levels below their current grade. This causes a problem when the curriculum texts are at grade level and are not always appealing to students. When students are forced to read texts that are above their reading level and they are expected to participate in class discussions about these texts, they are reminded that they are not on the same level as their peers. This contributes to their lack of participation. When selecting texts, teachers can consider the students' reading level and assign them leveled texts that allow them to build their reading skills while still learning the content. Teachers can select texts that match students' background knowledge and interest base. Students will have an easier time reading texts that they can relate to and are interested in. As always, there is research to contradict this theory, and some researchers have found that assigning more challenging texts that students can relate to is beneficial, as long as they can talk about the text with peers. Students want to be challenged and not feel like they always have the easier text to read, and they may comprehend more than the teacher expected if they are given an appropriate challenging text. This would all depend on the population of students in the classroom, because this is not always the case with all struggling readers. Teachers can also select texts based on the student's culture. This is called the culturally relevant approach, and it takes into consideration the student's cultural and social background. This approach requires the teacher to understand the students' lives both in and out of school in order to select texts that will help students understand themselves and the world around them. This approach is mainly used for students with diverse backgrounds, but it can be particularly useful for marginalized readers to gain access into the classroom discussion. Since they can relate more with the text, they have relevant information and experiences to add to the classroom practices. The more the student feels their contribution is helpful to the class, the more the student will participate in future assignments. Teachers can choose texts based on culture by assessing students' funds of knowledge. Text cannot be chosen solely on a student's fund of knowledge because the teacher needs to keep the subject content in mind, but this approach has had positive effects on students' standardized test results and has increased the participation in the classroom. Struggling readers have this label because of the way they are perceived as readers in a classroom setting, but many struggling readers are active readers outside of school. Knowing this, teachers can assess students' general knowledge and their reading habits outside of school to create a positive learning environment for marginalized readers to become primary readers. Teachers can cover academic content and meet standards better by connecting instruction to students' own funds of knowledge. Although teachers need to keep in mind that assessing students' funds of knowledge enhances engagement, but does not replace academic instruction. The goal is to design a curriculum and instructional design that responds to students' needs in local communities while helping them succeed in the current system of educational accountability. Gaining information about a student's life outside of school can be challenging since teachers only see students for a short period inside school. Therefore, this book gave 5 different categories and sets of questions that teachers can use and adapt to assess their students' funds of knowledge. The 5 categories are family and home life funds, community funds, personal activity funds, popular cultural funds, and general knowledge/current event funds. Asking questions about a student's family and home life gives the teacher insight about their family structure, family relationships, working lives, domestic activities, and daily household routines and traditions. This kind of information is important because it gives the teacher an idea of what skills, interests, and vocabulary the students possess, along with their notions of social norms. These social norms may vary between culture and class, therefore it's helpful to understand how each student views them. Community funds are similar to family and home funds, and it allows the teacher to gain an understanding of the student's social interactions, patterns of activity, consumer knowledge, and communication styles. A teacher may interpret a social interaction to be rude, but the student may understand the same action to be socially acceptable. A teacher wouldn't know this without interviewing the student. Finding out information about the student's personal activities gives insight into what interests the students have and how they interact with friends. These questions also give insight into how students view relationships with their peers. Popular culture questions allow teachers to understand a student's past experience with reading books and social media. Students share why certain things interest them, and teachers can use this to choose activities that will accommodate their interests. If the students come from a home that doesn't have access to a computer or internet, marginalized readers may need more direct instruction and practice with keyboarding, using search engines, evaluating the utility of various websites. General knowledge and current events allow students to share where they have been and what places interest them for future traveling. Teachers gain an understanding of students' interpretations of the world and how they view authority figures. By finding out students' funds of knowledge, teachers are better able to choose texts strategically based on their students' individual interests and needs. Teachers can also adapt their instructional techniques and disciplinary content and processes based on scenarios that the students are more inclined to understand. The point of assessing students' funds of knowledge is to learn with them and see how their daily lives can be linked with the things they will learn and do during English class, and to make the curriculum more acceptable to them as readers. Obviously, teachers should not choose text based solely on students' interests, as well as text should not be based solely on mandated standardized tests. Teachers need to find a balance between the two, generate more responsive curriculum and supportive instructional practices. To help marginalized readers increase their reading achievement in school, they should be taught comprehension strategies, text structures, and vocabulary through the use of systematically assessed and relevant topics, content, and activities.